If India wants to sustain 8% GDP growth using an investment-driven model, then it needs to think seriously about a major constraint and hurdle in the path of such a model, which is the ability to enforce contracts and resolve disputes. More generally, of course, the legal system. Now, the recent World Bank's Ease of Doing Business indicator ranked us at number 77. Now, that was a big jump for us, but in the subcategory for enforcement of contracts, we are still ranked 163. Now, clearly, this is seen by many businesses in India as well as international businesses as a major hurdle in investing in India, and we need to do something about it. Now, most people tend to think that with 3.5 crore cases stuck in pendency backlogs in the legal system, this is a problem that can never really be solved. But in the economic survey, we did some analysis, and we found that while it is a difficult problem, it is something about which we can in fact do something. It is not an insurmountable problem. So let me give you some flavor of the numbers. Now remember that 88% of the cases that are stuck in the legal system are not in the High Court and the Supreme Court, but in the lower courts. So this is where the real focus of reform has to be. So how many additional judges would be needed if we wanted to at least stop adding to the backlog, i.e. if we wanted to reach 100% clearance rate? So our analysis suggested that if we had 2,300 odd additional judges in the lower courts, 93 additional judges in high courts, and 1 additional judge in the Supreme Court, we would be able to achieve 100% clearance rate. Now that is not a very large number. So if we simply wanted to stabilize the backlog, this is the accretion we would need. Now, of course, this doesn't solve the problem of the backlog. So again, we did some analysis. We found that, of course, it would need a lot more judges. But again, we found that there is enormous scope for increasing efficiency. And the amounts of efficiency that we need to improve are not astronomical. So I already mentioned to you the number of judges that we need to reach stability. Now, that, as you'll be surprised to find, is well within what is sanctioned. Now, supposing we reach those sanctioned levels, then how much efficiency would we need? It turns out we need only 24% increase in efficiency at sanction strength in the lower courts in order to be able to begin to clear this backlog of 3.5 crore cases within 5 years. For high courts, this efficiency gain is only 4% at sanction strength in order to clear the backlog in 5 years. That is, to a large extent, a reflection of the fact that we are functioning so far below sanction strength in the high courts. And in the Supreme Court, where we are almost at sanction strength, there an 18% increase in efficiency would allow us to clear the backlog in 5 years' time. Now, these are obviously illustrative numbers, but it just shows you that these are not very large numbers. And there are many ways in which we can improve our efficiency gains. For example, increasing the number of working days. The higher courts, that is the high courts and the Supreme Court, they tend to have fairly long vacations. The Supreme Court, for example, only works for about 190 days a year after accounting for vacations and weekends and so on. Compare that to about 245 days that a central government office stays open. So clearly there is scope for efficiency gains simply by staying open longer. This is not true of the lower courts, which tend to work almost as long as the central government offices. Then there is huge efficiency gains to be had from technology applications, and the economic survey does talk about some of them. And finally, we need to take into account the amount of time that the judiciary has to spend on administrative affairs. Now, across the world, the experience is that the administrative aspects of the courts is handled by a specialized service. This means that the judicial officers don't have to spend time thinking about the processes and other administrative things. Now, we have argued, and of course this has been argued by others as well, that possibly we need to consider creating a specialized administrative service for the judiciary that takes away many of the administrative and procedural responsibilities of the courts, and therefore allow the judges to concentrate on what they do best. So these were just a few illustrative examples of how efficiency gains can be improved. And as I pointed out, that the combination of having additional judges and efficiency gains mean that this is a problem that is definitely within surmountable aspiration. I mean, it's not going to be easy, but it is not a problem that we cannot solve if we put our mind to it. And I would argue this is the single most important investment that India can make. India is about to undergo a major period of demographic change. Now, the driver of this shift in demographics is a large decline in fertility. Now, for a country where we are used to always worrying about population growth rates, it will come as some surprise to many people that we are going to see our total fertility rate fall to replacement levels by 2021. In other words, we will no longer be producing enough babies in order to replace ourselves. Now, this doesn't mean that population growth rate will immediately go down to zero. For some decades, we will see population growth happening because we are living longer. Nevertheless, it is quite a big shift to be coming to a state where our fertility is below these replacement rates. In fact, for many parts of the country, this is already true for some time now. For example, for southern states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala, for some northern states like Himachal, Punjab, in the east we have West Bengal, where these fertilities have been below replacement rate for quite some time now. In fact, the age group 0 to 19 has already peaked in India, and for the next few decades we will begin to see the proportion of population in this bracket steadily decrease. On the other hand, we will begin to see the proportion of population of working age go up very, very sharply. This is what, as many of you know, is called the demographic dividend period. Now, these changes require us to rethink fundamentally many things about the way we do public provision of basic services. I'll give you a few illustrations. Take, for example, primary schools. Now, generally, most people will be under the impression that we need to keep building more and more primary schools. But as I just pointed out to you, the population in the 0 to 19 age bracket has already peaked and is beginning to come down quite steadily. In fact, in many parts of the country, we are well advanced down this path. So, in order to make these schools viable in states like Kerala, Himachal, Uttarakhand, Punjab, Tamil Nadu, etc., we will now have to begin to think seriously about how to consolidate schools in order to keep them viable. Now, this is not an argument for investing less in primary education. I'm just pointing out that we need to think much more of quality rather than quantity. Of course, there are parts of the country like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh where we still need to roll out more schools. So, there are big variations across the country. The same thing is true, by the way, on the other end of the demographic scale. We will see many states in India, as I mentioned, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Punjab, and so on, where the proportion of population that is above the age of 60 will go up very, very sharply. Tamil Nadu, for example, will clearly begin to age by the 2030s, which is not so far away. So, there are big variations around the country. And meanwhile, of course, the Gangetic Plains will remain relatively young and will perhaps be providing large numbers of migrants to the rest of the country because they will have an ever-growing proportion of population of working age. There's another area that we need to think about, which is in medical provision. Of course, India is underserved by hospitals, doctors, and so on. We need to increase investments in those areas. But again, we need to begin thinking especially for care for the geriatric segment. Historically, of course, this segment was small, but as I just pointed out, in certain parts of the country, this segment will go up very, very dramatically. Finally, we need to begin to revisit retirement ages. If we are going to live so much longer, then it will be the case that there will be a significant proportion of the population above the age of 60 still able to work. This has important implications for provision of pensions, for provision of insurance, and so on. Now, in many places around the world, they have already begun to increase the retirement age. We are, of course, far away from the stage where, say, Japan or Germany are. Nevertheless, this is something that needs to be signaled well in advance. We can't just turn up a later stage and announce that we are changing retirement ages, because people, have personal plans, and of course the calculations for pension and so on get influenced. So we need to, right up front, begin to thinking about when and how we are going to change retirement ages and announce them well in advance, so that all institutions and individuals can adjust their plans. The Honorable Prime Minister has given us a vision for a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25. This is rupees 375 lakh crores in nominal GDP terms. In turn, it implies that India has to sustain a real GDP growth rate of 8% per annum. Now, international evidence suggests that such high growth has only been sustained by a virtuous cycle of savings, investment, and exports, supported by demographic dividend. East Asia is a good illustration of this growth model. However, it should be noted that this approach significantly deviates from conventional textbook economics based on equilibriums. First, note that high investment is driven by availability of cheap capital, that in turn is driven by high savings rates, although foreign investment also plays a part in this. In conventional economics, savings rates are influenced by real interest rates. But the evidence is clear that it is demographics and growth that drive savings, not interest rates. Now, this provides a crucial degree of freedom to lower the cost of capital on a structural basis in India. Second, conventional economics puts a lot of emphasis on the substitutability of labor and capital. The survey argues that this is only true in a silo. When the full value chain is considered, labor and capital are complements. Again, China is a good illustration of this. In the last 2 decades, for example, China has invested almost half of its GDP while deploying hundreds of millions of workers. So, the survey argues that we should worry less about whether or not an investment is labor or capital intensive, and focus on whether or not the investment is efficient and whether it's adding to our international competitiveness. Third, exports are a key component of this strategy because high savings rates preclude domestic consumption as a driver of final demand. Hence, India will have to focus on export competitiveness if it wishes to opt for the investment-driven model. Now, some economists may say that the international trade environment is currently weak, but India's share in world exports is small, and we need to focus on growing our share.